In the misty forests of ancient Scandinavia, where the Baltic Sea meets windswept shores, a people emerged who would reshape the course of European history. The Goths, whose very name would become synonymous with both barbarian might and cultural sophistication, began their extraordinary journey in the fog-shrouded lands of southern Sweden and the Baltic Islands. Archaeological evidence from Gotland, the largest island in the Baltic Sea, reveals the sophisticated origins of Gothic civilization. Here, in burial grounds containing thousands of graves spanning several centuries, we find the earliest traces of a people destined for greatness. Stone ship settings, where graves were outlined with stones arranged in the shape of vessels, demonstrate the maritime culture that would enable Gothic expansion across the northern seas. The abundance of Roman coins found in these ancient burials, dating from the 1st through 3rd centuries, indicates extensive trade networks that connected these northern inhabitants with the broader European economy long before their famous migrations began. The Gothic language, preserved in fragments of Ulfilas' 4th century Bible translation and various runic inscriptions, provides additional evidence of their Scandinavian roots. Belonging to the East Germanic branch of the Indo-European language family, Gothic shared significant similarities with Old Norse, particularly in vocabulary related to warfare, kinship, and religious practices. Words like Reiks, meaning ruler or king, connected to Old Norse, Riker, and modern German, Reich, reveal the linguistic threads that bound the northern Germanic peoples together. As populations grew in their Scandinavian homeland, the Goths began their gradual migration southward. The archaeological record traces this journey through the distinctive wheelbark culture, which flourished in the Vistula River Valley from approximately 50 to 400 AD. These Polish sites reveal a population that practiced both cremation and inhumation, burying their dead alongside weapons, jewelry, and everyday objects that mirror finds from Gotland and southern Sweden. Settlements in the wheelbark region demonstrate sophisticated agricultural and craft production capabilities. Excavations have revealed substantial wooden longhouses, some exceeding 40 meters in length, capable of housing extended families and their livestock. These structures featured central hearths, storage areas, and workshops where skilled artisans produced the distinctive metalwork and pottery that would become hallmarks of Gothic material culture. The presence of Roman imports, including glass vessels, bronze implements, and luxury goods, indicates that Gothic communities maintained extensive trade relationships even during their migration period. Early Gothic society exhibited characteristics typical of Germanic peoples during the migration period, with important distinctive features that would influence their later historical development. Archaeological evidence suggests a hierarchical social structure headed by warrior aristocrats who controlled substantial agricultural territories and commanded the loyalty of free farmers, craftsmen, and slaves. Burial goods from elite graves include elaborate weapons, jewelry, and imported luxury items that demonstrate both martial prowess and participation in long-distance trade networks. The institution of the Thing, or popular assembly, played a crucial role in Gothic governance, with free men gathering to discuss legal matters, military campaigns, and leadership selection. This democratic element coexisted with strong royal authority, creating a political system that balanced aristocratic leadership with popular participation. Kings derived their legitimacy from both military success and claimed descent from divine ancestors, particularly the god Got, from whom the Gothic name itself may derive. Religious practices among the early Goths centered on the worship of Germanic deities, with particular reverence for war gods and fertility goddesses. Archaeological evidence from burial sites reveals elaborate ritual deposits of weapons, jewelry, and food offerings intended to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. The practice of weapon sacrifice in bogs and lakes, well documented in Scandinavia, appears to have continued among Gothic communities in Poland, suggesting strong continuity in religious traditions despite geographical displacement. The development of distinctive Gothic material culture accelerated during their residence in the Vistula region. Metalworkers perfected techniques for producing the characteristic eagle-headed fideli that would become symbols of Gothic identity across Europe. These brooches, often crafted from silver and decorated with intricate geometric patterns, served both practical and symbolic functions, securing clothing while displaying the wearer's status and cultural affiliation. The Gothic exodus from the Vistula River Valley during the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries marked the beginning of one of the most significant population movements in European history. Archaeological evidence from the final phases of the wheelbark culture reveals a systematic abandonment of settlements across Poland, with entire communities dismantling their longhouses and burying precious objects in hoards that would remain hidden for centuries. The migration route eastward followed river valleys and ancient trade paths, with Gothic groups moving in waves toward the fertile steppes beyond the Carpathian Mountains. The destination of this massive population movement was the Pontic-Caspian steppe region, a vast expanse of grassland stretching from the Dniester River to the Don, encompassing much of modern-day Ukraine and southern Russia. This territory offered several advantages that attracted Gothic settlers: abundant pasture land for livestock, fertile soil suitable for agriculture, and strategic positioning along trade routes connecting the Baltic with the Black Sea and Mediterranean markets. The archaeological signature of Gothic settlement in the Pontic steppe appears in the form of the Chernyakhov culture, named after a village near Kiev where characteristic artifacts were first systematically excavated. This culture, flourishing from approximately 200 to 400 AD, represents a unique synthesis of Gothic traditions with local influences and demonstrates the remarkable adaptability of Gothic communities to new environments. Chernyakhov sites extend across a territory of roughly 100,000 square kilometers, indicating the scale of Gothic settlement and their success in establishing territorial control over vast areas. Chernyakhov settlements display a sophisticated understanding of landscape utilization and defensive positioning. Villages typically occupied elevated locations near rivers, providing access to water while offering natural protection against potential attacks. The larger settlements, such as those excavated at Componesti in Romania and Budesti in Moldova, covered areas exceeding 100 hectares and housed populations numbering in the thousands. The material culture of Chernyakhov sites reveals a population that maintained strong connections to Gothic traditions while incorporating elements from their new environment. Pottery production combined handmade vessels and traditional Germanic styles with wheel-thrown ceramics showing Roman and local influences. Metalwork reached new levels of sophistication, with Gothic smiths producing elaborate silver and bronze fibulae featuring intricate animal designs and geometric patterns that would influence European decorative arts for centuries. Agricultural practices among Chernyakhov communities combined traditional Germanic farming methods with steppe pastoralism. Excavations reveal extensive grain storage facilities, including large sunken granaries capable of holding surplus crops for extended periods. The cultivation of wheat, barley, and millet provided the agricultural foundation for population growth, while cattle, sheep, and horses supported both subsistence needs and trade activities. The integration of diverse tribal groups within Gothic territories created a complex social and political landscape. The Chernyakhov culture encompassed not only Gothic settlers but also Sarmatian tribes, Dacian remnants, and various other Germanic peoples who had migrated into the region. This multicultural population required new forms of political organization that could accommodate different traditions and maintain stability across vast territories. Sarmatian tribes, descendants of the nomadic peoples who had dominated the Pontic steppes for centuries, possessed sophisticated military traditions and extensive knowledge of steppe warfare. Their heavy cavalry tactics, employing armored horsemen with long lances, would significantly influence Gothic military development. The integration of Sarmatian warriors into Gothic military structures provided the Goths with enhanced mobility and tactical capabilities that would prove crucial in their later conflicts with Rome. The emergence of powerful Gothic chieftains during this period reflects the challenges of governing diverse populations across extensive territories. Archaeological evidence from elite burials reveals individuals of extraordinary wealth and status, buried with elaborate weapons, jewelry, and imported luxury goods that demonstrate their participation in international trade networks. Initial contacts between Gothic communities and the Roman Empire occurred through multiple channels during the 3rd century. Roman merchants had long operated in the Black Sea region, establishing trading posts and maintaining diplomatic relationships with local rulers. The arrival of Gothic populations disrupted these established patterns but also created new opportunities for commercial exchange. Border skirmishes along the Danube frontier began as Gothic populations expanded southward and encountered Roman defensive positions. These early conflicts typically involved small-scale raids and cattle rustling rather than major military campaigns. Roman frontier troops stationed in fortified positions along the river initially viewed Gothic activities as manageable security challenges rather than existential threats to imperial stability. The first major Gothic incursion into Roman territory occurred in 238 AD under circumstances that revealed both the opportunistic nature of Gothic leadership and the empire's growing vulnerability along its extended frontiers. Emperor Maximinus Thrax had withdrawn substantial military forces from the Danubian frontier to support his campaigns in Germany, leaving the river defenses undermanned and poorly coordinated. The initial Gothic crossing of the Danube involved approximately 3,000 warriors organized into multiple war bands, each led by experienced chieftains who had proven themselves in previous raids against Sarmatian and Dacian settlements. These forces demonstrated remarkable coordination for what appeared to be independent tribal groups, suggesting the existence of a unified command structure capable of planning and executing complex military operations. The Gothic advance into Moesia Superior revealed tactical innovations that would characterize their military operations for the next 3 decades. Rather than engaging in the traditional barbarian pattern of quick raids followed by immediate withdrawal, the Goths established fortified camps in Roman territory and began systematic exploitation of the province's resources. The Siege of Histria in 238 AD demonstrated Gothic capabilities in organized warfare that surprised Roman commanders accustomed to dealing with less sophisticated barbarian opponents. The Goths employed siege engines constructed from local timber, including battering rams and scaling ladders that enabled them to assault the city's walls directly. More significantly, they demonstrated patience and logistical planning by maintaining their siege for several months, indicating their ability to supply large forces in enemy territory for extended periods. The Gothic withdrawal from this first major incursion occurred not due to Roman military pressure, but because of developments in their homeland territories. Sarmatian tribes, taking advantage of Gothic absence, had launched attacks against Gothic settlements east of the Dniester River, forcing the war bands to return and defend their families and livestock. The decade following the first Gothic incursion witnessed escalating tensions along the Danubian frontier. The Goths used this period to consolidate their territorial gains, integrate captured Roman military equipment and techniques, and recruit additional tribal groups for future campaigns. Archaeological evidence from Gothic settlements during this period reveals increased production of iron weapons, the construction of larger fortified centers, and the accumulation of Roman coins and precious metals that would finance future military operations. The resumption of major Gothic warfare in 248 AD coincided with the celebration of Rome's millennium, creating a symbolic challenge to imperial prestige that demanded vigorous response. The Gothic Confederation had grown substantially during the previous decade, incorporating Sarmatian cavalry units, Dacian remnants, and various Germanic tribes into a military alliance capable of fielding armies exceeding 20,000 warriors. The siege of Philippopolis in 249 AD marked a turning point in Gothic military capabilities and Roman defensive strategy. The city, located in the heart of Thrace and serving as a major administrative center, presented formidable defensive challenges that required Gothic forces to develop new siege techniques. The Goths constructed elaborate earthworks surrounding the city, including trenches, palisades, and siege towers that demonstrated their ability to conduct complex engineering operations. The fall of Philippopolis after a siege lasting several months provided the Goths with enormous quantities of plunder, including gold, silver, precious stones, and luxury goods that would finance their military operations for years to come. More importantly, the victory demonstrated Gothic capabilities to other barbarian tribes and encouraged additional groups to join their confederation. The Battle of Abritus in 251 AD represented the climax of early Gothic military success against Rome and demonstrated the tactical innovations that made Gothic armies so formidable. Emperor Decius, determined to restore Roman prestige and eliminate the Gothic threat, assembled a substantial army, including elements of the Praetorian Guard, Danubian legions, and auxiliary forces drawn from across the empire. The Gothic army that faced Decius at Abritus had evolved significantly from the tribal war bands that had first crossed the Danube 13 years earlier. The core of Gothic strength consisted of heavily armed infantry organized into disciplined formations capable of sustained combat against Roman legionaries. The Gothic cavalry component included both traditional Germanic horsemen and Sarmatian heavy cavalry units that had been integrated into the Gothic Confederation. The battlefield at Abritus, located in marshy terrain near modern Razgrad in Bulgaria, favored Gothic tactical preferences while limiting Roman advantages in organization and equipment. The Goths had chosen their position carefully, occupying elevated ground that provided defensive advantages while channeling Roman attacks into predetermined killing zones. The decisive moment of the battle came when Gothic cavalry, led by Sarmatian cataphracts, charged the Roman left flank while it was struggling through marshy ground. The impact of armored horsemen against disordered Roman infantry created a breach in the imperial line that Gothic foot soldiers quickly exploited. Emperor Decius died during the confused fighting that followed the Gothic breakthrough, struck down while attempting to rally his collapsing forces. The aftermath of Abritus provided the Goths with their greatest victory against Rome and established their reputation as the most formidable barbarian opponents the empire faced. The capture of imperial standards, military equipment, and thousands of Roman prisoners provided both material and psychological advantages that would influence Gothic strategy for decades. Among the Roman captives taken during the Gothic campaigns of the 250s were numerous Christians whose presence in Gothic settlements introduced theological concepts that would prove more transformative than any military victory. These Christian prisoners, drawn from various social backgrounds and representing different regional traditions within the early church, found themselves in the unique position of practicing their faith among pagan captors who displayed surprising tolerance for religious diversity. The most significant figure to emerge from this period of religious transformation was Ulfilas, whose Gothic name, Ulfila, means little wolf, and whose remarkable career would bridge the gap between Gothic paganism and Christian faith. Born around 311 AD to a Gothic father and a Cappadocian mother who had been captured during earlier raids, Ulfilas embodied the cultural synthesis that characterized Gothic society during this period. Ulfilas's education combined traditional Gothic cultural training with Christian theological instruction, creating a unique synthesis that would prove crucial for his later missionary work. He learned the oral traditions of Gothic history and law, mastered the skills of reading and writing in Greek and Latin, and studied Christian scriptures with the intensity of a dedicated theologian. The development of Gothic Christianity during this period occurred within the broader context of theological controversies that were reshaping the Roman Christian Church. The Arian controversy, which had erupted in Alexandria during the 310s and continued to divide Christian communities throughout the empire, reached Gothic territories through the testimony of Christian captives and the missionary activities of Arian clergy. The appeal of Arian Christianity to Gothic populations stemmed from several factors that reflected both theological considerations and practical political calculations. The Arian emphasis on the unity and supremacy of God the Father resonated with Germanic religious traditions that emphasized the authority of divine kings and the hierarchical nature of spiritual power. More significantly, the adoption of Arian Christianity provided Gothic leaders with a religious identity that distinguished them from their Roman enemies while maintaining connections to the broader Christian world. Ulfilas's ordination as a bishop around 341 AD marked the beginning of systematic Christian missionary activity among the Gothic peoples. His consecration by Eusebius of Nicomedia, a prominent Arian theologian, established the theological orientation that would characterize Gothic Christianity and connected the Gothic Church to the broader Arian movement within the Roman Empire. The translation of Christian scriptures into the Gothic language represented Ulfilas's most enduring contribution to both Gothic culture and the broader history of Christianity. This monumental undertaking required not only linguistic expertise but also the creation of an entirely new writing system capable of representing Gothic phonemes and grammatical structures. The Gothic alphabet developed by Ulfilas combined elements from Greek, Latin, and runic scripts, creating a unique writing system that reflected the multicultural influences within Gothic society. The alphabet consisted of 27 letters, each carefully chosen to represent specific sounds in the Gothic language while maintaining visual connections to familiar writing systems. The process of biblical translation into Gothic required Ulfilas to make numerous decisions about theological terminology and cultural adaptation that would influence Gothic Christianity for generations. The translation of key theological concepts required careful consideration of Gothic vocabulary and cultural associations. Ulfilas's choices in these matters reflected both his theological training and his intimate knowledge of Gothic society. The surviving fragments of Ulfilas's Gothic Bible, preserved primarily in the 6th century Codex Argentius housed in Uppsala University, provide invaluable insights into both Gothic language and early Christian theology. The manuscript, written in silver and gold ink on purple parchment, reflects the high status accorded to Christian texts within Gothic society and demonstrates the sophisticated book production capabilities of Gothic scriptoriums. The theological implications of Gothic adoption of Arian Christianity extended far beyond simple religious conversion to encompass fundamental questions about the relationship between Germanic peoples and Roman civilization. The Arian emphasis on the Father's supremacy and the Son's subordination provided theological justification for Gothic political independence while maintaining Christian identity. The development of Gothic Christian culture during the 4th century created new forms of artistic expression that combined traditional Germanic motifs with Christian symbolism. Gothic metalworkers began incorporating Christian symbols into their traditional animal-style decorations, creating hybrid artistic traditions that reflected the synthesis of pagan and Christian elements within Gothic society. The influence of Christianity on Gothic political organization manifested in several important ways that transformed traditional Germanic governmental structures. The Christian emphasis on divine authority and moral law provided new sources of legitimacy for Gothic rulers while introducing concepts of justice and governance that complemented traditional Germanic legal practices. The social structures of Gothic communities underwent significant modifications as Christian teachings about human dignity and spiritual equality challenged traditional Germanic hierarchies. While Gothic society remained fundamentally stratified, Christian concepts of spiritual brotherhood and divine concern for the poor created new obligations for elite members and new opportunities for social mobility. The persistence of Arian Christianity among Gothic peoples throughout the migration period reflected both theological conviction and political necessity. The theological differences between Arian and Nicene Christianity became markers of ethnic and political identity that distinguished Gothic communities from Roman populations. The maintenance of Arian beliefs provided Gothic rulers with religious justification for their independence while creating barriers to full integration with Roman society. The tranquil prosperity that had characterized Gothic territories in the Pontic-Caspian steppe for over a century came to an abrupt and violent end during the 370s with the arrival of a nomadic confederation whose military capabilities and ruthless efficiency would reshape the entire political landscape of Eastern Europe. The Huns, emerging from the vast depths of Central Asia with a warrior culture honed by generations of conflict against Chinese and Persian civilizations, brought with them military technologies and tactical innovations that rendered traditional Gothic defensive strategies obsolete. The first reports of Hunnic presence reached Gothic settlements through terrified refugees fleeing from territories east of the Don River, where Alanic tribes had maintained control for centuries. These initial accounts described horsemen who seemed to live permanently mounted, subsisting on mare's milk and raw meat while moving with supernatural speed across vast distances. The Hunnic military organization represented a synthesis of steppe warfare traditions perfected through centuries of conflict across the Eurasian landmass. Their armies consisted of decimal units organized into groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 warriors, with each level commanded by experienced officers who maintained strict discipline through a combination of rewards and brutal punishments. The technological advantages possessed by Hunnic forces extended beyond their famous composite bows to encompass sophisticated siege equipment, and metallurgical techniques acquired through contact with Chinese and Persian civilizations. Hunnic siege engines, including torsion catapults and battering rams, enabled them to assault fortified positions that had previously provided Gothic communities with security against nomadic raiders. The Ostrogothic kingdom of Germanic, which had reached its zenith during the mid-4th century, encompassed territories stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea and included dozens of tribal groups united under Greuthungi leadership. The kingdom's prosperity derived from control of major trade routes connecting northern Europe with Mediterranean markets, while its military strength rested on the integration of diverse tribal traditions into a unified fighting force. The initial Hunnic assault on Ostrogothic territories occurred with devastating swiftness during the winter of 375 to 376 AD, when frozen rivers provided highways for cavalry movement and Gothic defensive preparations were hampered by severe weather conditions. Hunnic forces, accustomed to winter warfare and equipped with specialized cold weather gear, maintained their mobility while Gothic armies struggled with logistical challenges and reduced effectiveness of their traditional fighting methods. The Battle of the Dnieper, fought in early 376 AD, marked the decisive engagement that destroyed Ostrogothic resistance and led to the collapse of Ermaneric's kingdom. Gothic forces, numbering approximately 15,000 warriors drawn from various tribal groups, attempted to establish defensive positions along the river's western bank, while Hunnic cavalry maintained pressure through constant harassment and feigned retreats. The death of Ermaneric during the battle, whether from wounds sustained in combat or from suicide as later Gothic traditions claimed, symbolized the complete collapse of Ostrogothic resistance and the end of an era in Gothic history. The loss of their legendary king, combined with the destruction of their military forces and the occupation of their territories, created a psychological trauma that would influence Gothic collective memory for generations. The Visigothic response to the Hunnic threat reflected both their different political organization and their proximity to Roman territories that offered potential refuge. Unlike the centralized Ostrogothic kingdom, Visigothic society remained organized around multiple competing chieftains who struggled to coordinate unified resistance efforts. The Visigothic king Fritigern emerged as the dominant leader during this period of crisis through his combination of military experience and diplomatic skill. His assessment of Hunnic strength led him to conclude that successful resistance required either Roman military assistance or evacuation to Roman territory where Gothic populations could regroup and rebuild their strength. The decision to seek Roman refuge represented a fundamental transformation in Gothic political strategy and marked the beginning of a new phase in Gothic-Roman relations. The traditional Gothic preference for independence and their pride in military prowess made the prospect of seeking imperial protection deeply humiliating for many warriors and nobles. The practical necessities of survival, however, overcame cultural preferences as reports of continued Hunnic advances made clear that remaining in their ancestral territories would result in death or enslavement. The crossing of the Danube in late 376 AD involved logistical challenges that strained both Gothic organizational capabilities and Roman administrative resources. The Gothic population seeking refuge included not only warriors and their families but also craftsmen, slaves, livestock, and portable wealth that represented the accumulated prosperity of centuries. The Roman officials responsible for managing the crossing, particularly the commanders Lupicinus and Maximus, had systematically exploited their positions to extract personal profit from Gothic desperation, while failing to provide the basic necessities promised during the initial negotiations. Their corrupt practices included selling dog meat to starving Gothic families at inflated prices, demanding sexual favors from Gothic women in exchange for food rations, and confiscating valuable possessions under the pretense of weapons searches. The humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in the makeshift Gothic camps scattered across Thrace during the winter of 376 to 377 AD created conditions that would transform desperate refugees into a formidable military force capable of challenging Roman imperial authority. The breakdown of Roman supply systems during the harsh winter months created acute shortages of food, fuel, and shelter that pushed Gothic communities toward the brink of starvation. The incident at Marcianopole in early 377 AD, where Roman officials attempted to assassinate Gothic leaders during a diplomatic banquet, provided the immediate catalyst that transformed Gothic discontent into open rebellion. The Roman plan, apparently coordinated by Lupicinus and designed to eliminate Gothic leadership through treachery, demonstrated the extent of imperial desperation and the complete breakdown of diplomatic relations. The outbreak of violence following the Marcianopole incident revealed the extent of Gothic military preparation and their ability to coordinate resistance activities across multiple refugee camps. Gothic warriors, despite Roman restrictions on their movement, had maintained communication networks that enabled rapid mobilization of forces throughout Thrace. The initial Gothic military operations focused on securing weapons and supplies necessary for sustained resistance against Roman authority. Gothic forces systematically attacked Roman armories, supply depots, and administrative centers while avoiding direct confrontation with major Roman military units. Their intimate knowledge of local geography, acquired through months of forced residence in the region, provided significant advantages in conducting guerrilla operations. The Roman military response to Gothic rebellion revealed the empire's chronic manpower shortages and the poor quality of frontier troops available for immediate deployment. The Danubian legions, weakened by years of budget cuts and recruitment difficulties, lacked the training and equipment necessary for effective counterinsurgency operations. The expansion of Gothic territorial control during 377 AD demonstrated their ability to establish effective administration over conquered Roman territories. Gothic forces occupied major cities, including Adrianople, Philippopolis, and Nicopolis, while establishing fortified camps that served as bases for further military operations. The military preparations undertaken by both sides during the winter of 377 to 378 AD revealed the scale and significance of the coming conflict. Emperor Valens assembled a substantial army, including elements from the eastern field armies, Danubian frontier forces, and allied barbarian units recruited from various tribes. This force, numbering approximately 20,000 men, represented one of the largest Roman armies deployed in the Balkans during the 4th century. The approach of the Roman army toward Adrianople in August 378 AD occurred under conditions of extreme heat and logistical strain that affected both the physical condition of Roman troops and their tactical capabilities. The imperial forces, heavily armored and carrying substantial equipment loads, suffered from dehydration and exhaustion as they marched across the sun-baked Thracian plains. The Gothic defensive position near Adrianople demonstrated Fritigern's sophisticated understanding of battlefield tactics and his ability to exploit Roman weaknesses. The Gothic camp, protected by a circular arrangement of wagons and earthworks, occupied elevated ground that provided defensive advantages while limiting Roman options for flanking maneuvers. The composition of the Gothic army at Adrianople reflected the diverse nature of the forces that had joined Fritigern's rebellion. The core of Gothic strength consisted of traditional Germanic infantry armed with spears, shields, and single-edged swords, organized into tribal units that maintained their traditional fighting methods and leadership structures. The Gothic cavalry component included both traditional Germanic horsemen and Sarmatian heavy cavalry units that had joined the rebellion during its expansion phase. The initial phase of the battle began with Roman attempts to negotiate a settlement, while maintaining military pressure on Gothic positions. Emperor Valens, recognizing the strength of the Gothic defensive position, sought to avoid costly frontal assaults by offering terms that might divide Gothic leadership and reduce their fighting effectiveness. The Roman assault on the Gothic wagon laager began with coordinated attacks by infantry and cavalry units designed to overwhelm Gothic defenses through superior numbers and equipment. The Roman legions, advancing in traditional formation with shields locked and spears leveled, initially made progress against Gothic defensive positions. The decisive moment of the battle came when Gothic cavalry forces, returning from foraging operations, struck the exposed Roman right flank while it was engaged in assaulting the wagon fortifications. The Gothic horsemen, led by Sarmatian cataphracts and supported by traditional Germanic cavalry, charged into the Roman formations with devastating effect. The collapse of Roman formation integrity following the Gothic cavalry charge led to widespread panic as individual units found themselves surrounded and cut off from mutual support. Emperor Valens died during the chaotic retreat that followed the Gothic breakthrough, struck down while attempting to rally his collapsing forces. The death of the emperor in battle represented an unprecedented disaster for Roman prestige and demonstrated the complete collapse of imperial authority in the face of barbarian military superiority. The catastrophic defeat at Adrianople fundamentally transformed the relationship between the Gothic peoples and the Roman Empire, creating conditions that would eventually lead to the establishment of the first successful barbarian kingdom within former imperial territory. The new emperor, Theodosius I, who assumed power in 379 AD, faced the daunting task of rebuilding imperial military strength while simultaneously containing Gothic expansion throughout the Balkans. The negotiations between Theodosius and Gothic leaders during 381 to 382 AD resulted in the first formal Foedus agreement that would establish the legal framework for barbarian settlement within Roman territory. The treaty recognized Gothic territorial autonomy within designated areas of Thrace while requiring them to provide military service to the empire under their own commanders. The terms of the Foedus agreement reflected the realities of power following Adrianople while maintaining face-saving formalities for Roman dignity. The Goths would retain their weapons, maintain their traditional leadership structures, and govern their territories according to their own laws and customs. In exchange, they would provide military service when requested by imperial authorities and refrain from attacking Roman territories or populations. The implementation of the Foedus system required significant adjustments from both Gothic and Roman populations as they adapted to new forms of coexistence within imperial territory. Gothic communities established permanent settlements in assigned territories, constructing fortified towns and agricultural villages that combined traditional Germanic building techniques with Roman architectural elements. The religious dimensions of Gothic settlement within Roman territory involved complex negotiations between Arian and Nicene Christian communities. The Goths' adherence to Arian Christianity, which denied the full divinity of Christ and rejected the Nicene Creed, created theological tensions with Roman populations and imperial authorities. However, the practical necessities of maintaining political stability led to official tolerance of Gothic religious practices. The economic integration of Gothic communities within the Roman system created new patterns of trade and resource utilization that benefited both populations. Gothic agricultural production, particularly grain cultivation and livestock raising, helped address chronic food shortages in the Balkans while providing Gothic communities with surplus products for trade. The reign of Alaric I, who emerged as the dominant Gothic leader during the 390s AD, marked a new phase in Gothic-Roman relations characterized by increasing Gothic assertiveness and territorial ambitions. Alaric's background as a Roman military officer who had served in imperial campaigns provided him with intimate knowledge of Roman military capabilities and political weaknesses. The Gothic military campaigns under Alaric's leadership demonstrated their evolution from desperate refugees to a formidable military force capable of challenging Roman authority throughout the Mediterranean world. The invasion of Italy in 401 AD represented Alaric's most ambitious undertaking and demonstrated Gothic capabilities for strategic planning and execution on an unprecedented scale. The Siege of Milan in 402 AD revealed the extent of Gothic military development and their mastery of Roman siege techniques. Gothic forces surrounded the city with elaborate earthworks and siege lines that demonstrated their ability to conduct complex engineering operations. The Gothic employment of battering rams, siege towers, and catapults showed their adaptation of Roman military technology while maintaining their traditional emphasis on mobility and aggressive tactics. The sack of Rome in 410 AD represented the culmination of Gothic military and political development under Alaric's leadership. The capture of the Eternal City, which had not fallen to foreign enemies for over 800 years, demonstrated the complete transformation of Gothic society from refugee population to conquering power. The three-day occupation of Rome provided the Goths with enormous quantities of gold, silver, and precious objects that would finance their subsequent military operations and territorial expansion. The Gothic treatment of Rome during the sack revealed their sophisticated understanding of political symbolism and their desire to present themselves as legitimate successors to Roman authority rather than mere barbarian destroyers. Alaric's forces respected Christian churches and clergy while systematically looting pagan temples and imperial palaces. The Gothic migration to southern Gaul following Alaric's death in 410 AD reflected their strategic assessment of territorial opportunities and their desire to establish permanent settlement in fertile agricultural regions. The establishment of Gothic settlements in Toulouse and surrounding territories during 418 AD marked the beginning of the Visigothic kingdom as a permanent political entity. The expansion of Visigothic territory into Hispania during the 450s AD represented the natural extension of their territorial ambitions and their response to opportunities created by the collapse of Roman authority in the peninsula. The Gothic invasion of Spain occurred at the invitation of Roman authorities who sought barbarian assistance in suppressing rebellions and containing the expansion of Suebi and Vandal kingdoms. The establishment of Toledo as the Visigothic capital during the late 5th century reflected their recognition of the city's strategic importance and its symbolic significance as the center of Roman administration in Spain. The Gothic occupation of Toledo provided them with access to the peninsula's administrative records, legal traditions, and governmental institutions that would prove crucial for establishing effective rule over their diverse territories. The development of Visigothic legal codes during the 6th and 7th centuries represented one of their most significant contributions to European civilization and demonstrated their sophisticated approach to governing diverse populations. The Breviary of Alaric, promulgated in 506 AD, provided a simplified version of Roman law adapted for use by both Gothic and Roman populations within the kingdom. The Liber Iudiciarum, completed during the reign of Rexwinth in 654 AD, represented the culmination of Visigothic legal development and created a unified legal system that applied to all inhabitants of the kingdom regardless of their ethnic background. This comprehensive legal code addressed criminal law, civil disputes, commercial regulations, and family relationships while incorporating both Germanic and Roman legal traditions. The administrative system developed by Visigothic rulers combined Germanic political traditions with Roman bureaucratic practices to create governmental institutions capable of managing territories that extended from the Loire River to Gibraltar. The Gothic kings established a hierarchy of appointed officials who administered justice, collected taxes, and maintained military forces throughout the kingdom. The gradual integration of Gothic and Hispano-Roman populations occurred through intermarriage, religious conversion, and shared participation in governmental and military institutions. The conversion of the Visigothic royal family to Catholic Christianity during the late 6th century eliminated the primary religious barrier to integration and facilitated the emergence of a unified Spanish Christian culture. Meanwhile, their Ostrogothic cousins had been following a dramatically different path under Hunnic domination for nearly a century following the collapse of Ermaneric's kingdom. The emergence of Theodoric as the dominant figure among the Ostrogoths occurred against the backdrop of Byzantine political maneuvering and the ongoing struggle for control over the Italian peninsula. Born around 454 AD, Theodoric had spent his youth as a hostage in Constantinople, where he received a Roman education and gained intimate knowledge of imperial administrative practices and diplomatic protocols. This unique background, combining Gothic warrior traditions with Byzantine sophistication, would prove crucial in his later achievements as both military commander and political leader. The negotiations that led to Theodoric's Italian expedition in 489 AD reflected the complex political calculations of both Byzantine and Gothic leaders. The formal agreement granted Theodoric the authority to invade Italy and depose Odoacer in the emperor's name, with the understanding that successful conquest would result in Theodoric's recognition as imperial representative in the peninsula. The Ostrogothic invasion of Italy began with a massive migration that included not only Theodoric's warriors but also their families, livestock, and portable possessions, indicating the Gothic intention to establish permanent settlement rather than conduct temporary raids. The Siege of Ravenna, which lasted from 491 to 493 AD, demonstrated both the persistence of Gothic military pressure and the sophisticated nature of their strategic planning. The establishment of Ravenna as the capital of the Ostrogothic kingdom reflected both practical considerations about defensive positioning and symbolic recognition of the city's importance as the former seat of Western Roman imperial authority. The administrative system established by Theodoric combined Gothic military organization with Roman bureaucratic traditions, creating governmental institutions that maintained continuity with imperial practices while incorporating Germanic elements. Theodoric's reign from 493 to 526 AD represented the culmination of Gothic political and cultural achievement in Italy. The Ostrogothic kingdom achieved remarkable prosperity through the restoration of agricultural production, the revival of urban commerce, and the reconstruction of infrastructure that had deteriorated during decades of civil warfare. The Gothic administration maintained Roman law for Roman citizens while allowing Goths to follow their traditional legal customs, creating a sophisticated legal system that accommodated diverse populations. The cultural flowering that occurred during Theodoric's reign produced some of the most remarkable achievements in late antique literature, philosophy, and architecture. The king's court at Ravenna attracted scholars, artists, and intellectuals from across the Mediterranean world, including the Roman philosopher Boethius, whose Consolation of Philosophy would become one of the most influential texts of the medieval period. The architectural achievements of the Ostrogothic period, including the magnificent mausoleum of Theodoric and the restoration of Roman monuments throughout Italy, demonstrated Gothic appreciation for classical artistic traditions while incorporating distinctive Germanic elements. The fusion of Gothic and Roman architectural styles created a unique aesthetic that would influence European building traditions for centuries. The religious policies implemented by Theodoric reflected his sophisticated understanding of the complex theological divisions within his kingdom. As an Arian Christian ruling over a predominantly Catholic population, Theodoric maintained official religious tolerance while respecting the authority of the Pope in spiritual matters. This delicate balance preserved political stability while avoiding the religious conflicts that plagued other barbarian kingdoms. The economic prosperity achieved during Theodoric's reign resulted from his systematic restoration of agricultural production and commercial networks that had collapsed during the political upheavals of the 5th century. Gothic landowners worked closely with Roman agricultural experts to revive cultivation techniques and restore productivity to abandoned estates. The reconstruction of harbors, roads, and commercial facilities enabled Italian merchants to resume trade relationships with Constantinople, North Africa, and Gaul. The decline of Ostrogothic power began during the troubled reign of Theodoric's successors, who lacked his political skill and military experience. The regency of Amalasuntha, Theodoric's daughter, attempted to maintain Gothic traditions while accommodating Roman interests, but faced opposition from Gothic nobles who resented the increasing influence of Roman advisors and the gradual abandonment of traditional Germanic customs. The Byzantine reconquest of Italy under Emperor Justinian's generals, Belisarius and Narses, marked the beginning of the Gothic wars that would devastate the peninsula and effectively end Ostrogothic political power. The siege of Rome between 537 and 538 AD demonstrated both the determination of Byzantine forces to reclaim former imperial territories and the desperate resistance offered by Gothic defenders who recognized that defeat would mean the extinction of their kingdom. The last Gothic strongholds fell during the 550s AD, with the capture of Verona and Pavia completing the Byzantine conquest of Italy. The surviving Ostrogothic population faced deportation, enslavement, or integration into Byzantine administrative structures. Many Gothic nobles fled northward into Frankish territories, where their descendants would eventually blend into the broader Germanic population of medieval Europe. While the Ostrogoths faced extinction in Italy, their Visigothic cousins in Spain were experiencing their own period of cultural flowering and political achievement. The conversion of King Recared to Catholic Christianity in 587 AD marked a watershed moment in Visigothic history, eliminating the religious divisions that had separated Gothic rulers from their Hispano-Roman subjects for over 2 centuries. The Councils of Toledo, which convened regularly from the 6th through 8th centuries, demonstrated the sophisticated theological and political culture that developed within the Visigothic kingdom. These assemblies, which included both ecclesiastical and secular leaders, addressed questions of religious doctrine, legal reform, and governmental policy while maintaining the traditional Gothic emphasis on consultation and consensus building. The artistic achievements of Visigothic Spain reflected the successful synthesis of Germanic, Roman, and Christian cultural traditions that characterized the kingdom's mature period. Gothic metalworkers produced elaborate jewelry, religious artifacts, and decorative objects that combined traditional animal-style motifs with Christian symbolism and Roman technical sophistication. The distinctive Visigothic architectural style, exemplified by churches such as San Juan de Banias and Santa Maria de Melque, created a unique aesthetic that influenced Spanish building traditions throughout the medieval period. The educational and intellectual developments within Visigothic Spain produced some of the most important scholars of the early medieval period, including Isidore of Seville, whose encyclopedic etymologies preserved classical learning for future generations. The Visigothic emphasis on education and scholarship created a literate culture that maintained connections to both Germanic traditions and classical Roman learning. The military organization of the mature Visigothic kingdom combined traditional Germanic warrior traditions with Roman tactical innovations and new military technologies adapted to Spanish conditions. The Gothic heavy cavalry, armed with long spears and protected by mail armor, provided the kingdom's primary striking force, while infantry units recruited from diverse populations offered tactical flexibility and numerical strength. The economic foundation of Visigothic prosperity rested on agricultural production, commercial networks, and tribute relationships with neighboring territories. The fertile valleys of central Spain provided abundant grain, while the mountainous regions supported livestock raising and mineral extraction. Gothic merchants maintained trade connections with Byzantine territories, Frankish kingdoms, and North African settlements. The social structure of late Visigothic society reflected the gradual integration of Gothic and Hispanic populations through intermarriage, religious conversion, and shared participation in governmental and military institutions. The traditional Germanic emphasis on personal loyalty and warrior values merged with Roman concepts of law and administration to create a distinctive political culture that balanced royal authority with aristocratic privileges. The external threats facing the Visigothic kingdom during the 7th and 8th centuries included Frankish expansion across the Pyrenees, Byzantine attempts to establish footholds in southeastern Spain, and increasing pressure from Muslim forces in North Africa. The Gothic response to these challenges required constant military preparedness and sophisticated diplomatic maneuvering to maintain territorial integrity and political independence. The invasion of Spain by Muslim forces under Tariq ibn Ziyad in 711 AD caught the Visigothic kingdom at a moment of internal division and civil warfare. The disputed succession following the death of King Witiza had divided Gothic nobles into competing factions, weakening the kingdom's ability to respond effectively to external threats. The Battle of Gotland in July 711 AD marked the decisive engagement that destroyed Visigothic military power and opened Spain to Muslim conquest. King Roderick, the last Visigothic monarch, died during the battle while attempting to rally his collapsing forces against overwhelming Muslim cavalry attacks. The Gothic army, weakened by internal divisions and surprised by the speed of the Muslim advance, disintegrated following the loss of their king and the collapse of their defensive positions. The aftermath of Gotland witnessed the rapid collapse of Visigothic resistance throughout most of the Iberian Peninsula. Muslim forces, reinforced by additional troops from North Africa, systematically occupied major cities and administrative centers while Gothic nobles fled northward toward the Cantabrian Mountains or sought accommodation with the new rulers. The survival of Gothic resistance in the mountainous regions of northern Spain provided the foundation for the later Christian reconquest of the peninsula. Pelayo, a Gothic noble who established a stronghold at Covadonga in Asturias, became the legendary founder of Christian resistance against Muslim rule. His victory over a Muslim expedition in 722 AD created the nucleus of the Kingdom of Asturias, which would eventually expand to encompass much of northwestern Spain. The Gothic refugees who established the Asturian kingdom maintained many of their traditional political and military customs while adapting to the harsh realities of mountain warfare and limited resources. The concept of Gothic legitimacy provided ideological justification for Christian resistance and territorial expansion, with later Asturian and Leonese kings claiming descent from Visigothic royal families. The cultural legacy of the Goths extended far beyond their political extinction to influence European civilization in numerous fundamental ways. The Gothic legal traditions, preserved in the Liber Iudiciarum and other codes, provided the foundation for medieval Spanish law and influenced legal development throughout Europe. The concept of written law codes that applied equally to all subjects, regardless of ethnic background, represented a revolutionary departure from traditional Germanic legal practices. The architectural innovations developed by Gothic builders, particularly the use of pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and flying buttresses, would eventually inspire the development of the Gothic architectural style that dominated European church construction during the High Medieval period. While the connection between Gothic peoples and Gothic architecture remains primarily linguistic, the Germanic emphasis on vertical construction and innovative engineering solutions contributed to the evolution of European building techniques. The preservation of classical learning within Gothic kingdoms, particularly through the work of scholars like Cassiodorus and Isidore of Seville, ensured the survival of Roman intellectual traditions during the chaotic centuries following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Gothic scriptoriums copied and preserved thousands of classical texts, while Gothic scholars produced encyclopedias, histories, and theological works that transmitted ancient knowledge to medieval Europe. The political innovations developed within Gothic kingdoms, including the concept of written constitutions, the integration of diverse populations under unified legal systems, and the balance between royal authority and aristocratic participation, provided models for medieval European governmental development. The Gothic emphasis on consultation and consensus building influenced the development of parliamentary institutions and constitutional monarchy throughout Europe. The religious contributions of Gothic Christianity, particularly the preservation and development of Arian theological traditions, influenced the broader evolution of Christian thought and practice. While Arian Christianity eventually disappeared as a distinct theological movement, Gothic religious practices and institutional structures contributed to the development of medieval church organization and liturgical traditions. The linguistic legacy of the Goths survives primarily through the fragments of Ulfilas's Bible translation, which provides invaluable evidence for the development of Germanic languages and the evolution of Indo-European linguistic structures. Gothic vocabulary and grammatical forms influenced the development of other Germanic languages, while the Gothic alphabet contributed to the evolution of medieval writing systems. The artistic traditions developed within Gothic communities, particularly metalworking techniques and decorative styles, influenced European art throughout the medieval period. The distinctive animal-style ornaments, geometric patterns, and cloisonné jewelry techniques developed by Gothic craftsmen spread throughout Europe and contributed to the development of medieval decorative arts. The military innovations pioneered by Gothic armies, including the integration of heavy cavalry and infantry formations, the development of siege techniques, and the coordination of diverse tribal forces, influenced European warfare for centuries. Gothic tactical principles and organizational methods provided models for medieval military development and contributed to the evolution of knightly combat and feudal military service. As the last echoes of Gothic resistance faded in the mountains of northern Spain during the 8th century, the remarkable journey of the Gothic peoples drew to its conclusion. From their origins in the misty forests of Scandinavia to their final strongholds in the Iberian Peninsula, the Goths had traversed not only vast geographical distances but also profound cultural transformations that would leave permanent marks on European civilization. The Gothic legacy lives on in the legal codes that shaped medieval jurisprudence, the architectural innovations that inspired cathedral builders, the scholarly traditions that preserved classical learning, and the political concepts that influenced constitutional development. Their story serves as a reminder of the dynamic nature of European cultural development and the complex processes through which diverse peoples contributed to the rich tapestry of Western civilization. In the end, the Goths achieved a form of immortality that transcended their political extinction. Their name became synonymous with the medieval architectural style that reached toward heaven with unprecedented ambition, their legal principles influenced the development of European jurisprudence, and their cultural contributions enriched the intellectual foundations of medieval civilization. Thus concludes the extraordinary saga of the Gothic peoples, a tale of migration and conquest, of cultural synthesis and religious transformation, of political innovation and artistic achievement. From the Baltic shores where they first emerged to the Spanish mountains where they made their final stand, the Goths left an indelible mark on the course of European history. Their story reminds us that the fall of civilizations often contains the seeds of new cultural flowering, and that the end of one chapter in human history frequently marks the beginning of another. In the gentle rhythm of historical narration, let these final words carry you into peaceful sleep, with the knowledge that the Gothic legacy continues to shape our world, even as the peoples themselves have long since passed into the realm of memory and legend. The winds that once carried Gothic longships across the Baltic Sea now whisper through the stone arches of Gothic cathedrals, and in that eternal whisper, the spirit of a remarkable people lives on.